Welcome to this lesson on Sonnet 116 by William Shakespeare. This is a super famous sonnet and kind of have a look at that in a minute, but I want you to think about why is it so famous? What is it about it that makes it a very popular poem in its day and also very popular now? Because if poetry kind of lasts, it stands the test of time, it lasts across hundreds of years, it's got to be something about it that's that grabs people and captures our attention and makes us feel something. So the first thing with this poem is to just be like, what does it make us feel? What kind of messages does it have? How and why has it become this iconic little poem? So I'm gonna go through vocab with you first. There's just a few little words here, so not too many. These are just so that you can understand what the poem's actually about when I go through it. I was actually going to add writ onto there as well, just because that's an old-fashioned word. So the first one is impediment. That's something that impedes you. It's a good word to write down if you're not confident with it and to kind of get used to using it in your essays or in your writing. Something that stops you from doing something or something that prevents another thing from working properly. Something that gets in the way. That's an impediment. Admit, you probably know what this means generally, like if you admit something. In this case, he kind of means confess or allow. Like you can admit to doing something, meaning you confess to do something. Sorry, in this case, it means allow, like enable something to have. So he talks about admitting impediments, meaning allowing things to stop the progress of love or the feeling of love. Tempest is another word for storm. Shakespeare loves this word. He's got a really amazing play called The Tempest that is maybe my favourite ever Shakespeare play, which is a bold claim. So he's really interested in the idea of tempests and storms, and it's a nice little word that means kind of quite a big wild storm, quite often sea storm as well. Remover, the remover that he talks about is just someone who tries to get rid of something. So he's talking about the remover, somebody who is removing something. And writ, just here at the end, I never writ. It just means wrote. It's an old-fashioned word for wrote. So the past tense of to write something. So now you're happy with all that vocab, hopefully. I'm going to read the poem out to you. Really important to always read your poetry aloud. You've probably heard me say this before if you've watched a lot of scribbly poetry videos. But always read it aloud, always hear other people read it aloud. It gives you more insight into the language and the rhythms, and it gives you a kind of easier way to memorize the sound of it. And it just makes you connect properly to the poem because they are intended to be spoken. Good, so I'll start. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the starter every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. So, as with all poetry, if this is the first time you've read it or you're not really sure about it and you're like, what is this on about? And that's normal. It takes you a while to get into poetry. They're like little puzzles that you unlock and decode. So I really like poems because they seem simple and small, but they just, they've got so much packed into them that you have to spend time to understand them. So I actually had a student who really didn't like poetry and she hated this poem and she had to study it for her A level. And I did it with her, and by the end of me explaining what this actually is saying, she was like, whoa, because it was so kind of crazy and like not what she expected, and it all kind of clicked together. So I've copied what I wrote out to her for you guys now, so hopefully it has the same effect. So instead of my normal summary that I do on poetry, it's actually like a kind of translation almost of this poem. So what it's saying in plain modern English. So I'm going to just read it out to you, and yeah, hopefully you get the effect. You understand what it's on about now. The reason I've done this is because there's no actual proper story to this one, because it's a sonnet, so it's just exploring an idea. It's not like actually telling a story, so it makes more sense to just kind of explore the ideas in this translation type way. So it's saying, don't let me allow any barriers or obstructions to the marriage of true minds, so to the marriage of people who are connected purely by intellect, so their minds are connected. So basically, there shouldn't be any barriers to true love. And true love is all about your mind, it's not about how nice you look or anything like that. Love can't be called love if it changes when something else has changed. So true love never changes. And it doesn't go away if someone tries to remove it. So say there's someone, I don't know, trying to steal your man. If it's true love, Shakespeare says that that doesn't matter, doesn't make any difference. Or your lady, someone trying to steal your lady. No, it's a fixed point in the distance that is not affected by storms. So obviously this is like a metaphor for the kind of chaos that we have in life. It's a star in the distance that allows lost ships to find their way. You can't measure the value of love, how much it's worth, but you can measure its height, how tall it is. So he means it's so high up it belongs to heaven. Time isn't in charge of love, but rosy lips and cheeks do fade with time, so we become uglier or less less kind of young and youthful with time. In contrast, love doesn't change when time passes, but it stays exactly the same, even up until the edge of death or destruction or doom. If this is wrong and someone can prove it, then I'm not a writer and nobody ever loved. So if you're still a bit confused, that's fine, because, like I say, it's not a story, it's a lyrical poem. It's a poem that explores an idea. So you have to kind of get used to a slightly different type of poem with this sonnet than you're probably used to. So take your time, spend time pausing here probably with this paragraph and having a check over what it says and making sure you kind of get all the points. So yeah, feel free to pause and spend longer with this if you need, and that's completely fine. So don't try and analyze a poem before you fully understand the meaning of it. So, some of you might be at the point where you need to repeat this, and that's totally fine. And take all the time you need, because once it clicks with you, you'll feel really confident with your essays. And before it clicks with you, you'll just be like, writing stuff like, is this crazy or does it make sense? So it really, really is important to feel confident with the story first, or the summary first. So for those of you who are confident, we're going to move on to the speaker in this poem. So speakers are not always the poet themselves, and even if they are, they're not the full poet. They're like a version of him or her. So we always call it the speaker instead of Shakespeare or the poet. So the ideas expressed here are not necessarily exactly the ideas of the poet, especially with Shakespeare, because he actually had like all these different poems. You notice that this is number 116. He wrote like a cycle of poems or a sequence of poems, and all these sonnets kind of connect together and they have running characters through them. And one of those characters is a poet. So we can assume that he's speaking in character, not exactly from his own Shakespearean self, especially because he never really gives us his true opinion in anything. He always messes around with different perspectives and ideas. So the speaker has a confident approach. He's confident about love. And it seems that maybe other people he knows are more confused or unsure in their interpretation of love. This might be one of the other characters in the sonnet sequence. But he is very clear and sure about what love is and what it isn't. He's maybe imitating the confident, unwavering character of love itself. he's trying to give us a feeling of love by personifying love, as we'll see in a minute. And he's saying that love has this confident, powerful character and it never changes no matter what. And he's also got that kind of personality to his voice when he's speaking. If the subject of love is much debated across time and between intellectuals, but the speaker seems so sure of himself, maybe he's sort of bluffing, or he's underneath all of it, he's got a bit of an anxiety and he has something to prove, like he's too sure of himself and it's not real, because he does seem like almost argumentative about love, like he's challenging. And he's like, if anyone can prove me wrong, then I'm not even a writer. Like it's very extreme and a bit crazy. So maybe one of my students actually suggested this, and I thought that this was a really good point. She's only in GCSE too, so yeah, so I was really impressed by this. Maybe he's overconfident, or he's posturing. He's not actually as confident as he seems, but he has to believe in this idea and he's trying to prove it. So, depending on your own interpretation of love and how idealistic you are, I'm very idealistic, so I prefer the really nice interpretation that he's just so confident and love is this beautiful thing, because I really like that, and I try to make that work. But if you're more cynical, which is totally fine, and I get why, you can use this alternative interpretation when you're analyzing. And you can say maybe he seems overconfident, or he's trying to prove himself to someone. So, language then. We have a few techniques here. There are more, but I've just kind of tried to give you the main ones that I tend to use when I'm analysing. So over the years, as I've been teaching this poem and even writing about this poem, I studied it in uni myself. These are the things that I tend to always pick up on, I think, when I'm analysing. So the first one is personification. Time and love are personified, meaning they're given personalities, characters. And Shakespeare does this a lot. It's quite common for the Renaissance era, so it's not an unusual thing to do at this time. His audience would kind of naturally understand what he's doing, whereas the modern audience kind of takes some explanation, kind of like I explained now. So love, as we've said, is personified as a strong, idealistic, unwavering character. He's really like confident and stable. Time is personified as the Grim Reaper, which is this kind of figure of death. Look up images if you're not sure what that is, because Grim Reaper is quite a significant figure in this poem. So it's kind of like a personification of death, a figure of death who always has like a sickle or a scythe, like a kind of sharp tool that they used to use to cut down wheat. It's really weird. It's really hard for me to explain. So yeah, just look up an image of the Grim Reaper. It will be quicker than me explaining. He's a very common image at this time, from medieval times onwards, actually, and people know about this figure of death. And you probably know or have seen this figure somewhere before anyway. The main one I can think of is this film called Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey that I loved as a kid. It's just a really silly film, but they have a Grim Reaper figure in it, and he's always trying to kill the main characters and he never gets away with it. But same sort of idea here. Times maybe trying to threaten love, but love is more powerful. So yeah, there's a personification, and when you're analysing that, you have to think about how and why are they personified, and what effects does Shakespeare create through turning those into personalities and characters? How does it help us understand the nature of these themes of time and love? So next then, there's tons of repetition. And you'll notice this. I've just picked up on three kind of key ones here. Or two even, have I? I don't know. I picked up on at least one. Love is not love that alters when it alteration finds. So saying love is not love seems like a tautology, which is saying the same thing twice, not really saying anything meaningful, because you're just repeating words like ice cream is ice cream, chocolate is chocolate. It doesn't really help you. If you said chocolate is a sweet dessert, I don't even know how to describe. Can't define chocolate, but if I was going to actually define chocolate, that wouldn't be a tautology. But if I was just like chocolate is chocolate, it's a tautology. So love is not love kind of seems tautological. It seems like it's just repeating itself. But actually, when we go deeper into the poem, we understand that he's saying love can't be called love if it changes over time, if it alters when it finds alteration. So if something changes in your situation and then the love changes, it's not love. So love is repeated throughout the poem to show that it's the main theme or topic. And the word love is really central, and that's why it's a recurring idea. I feel like this is usually what I analyze when I do this poem, that the poet is not so much in love with a single person, but he or she is obsessed with the idea of love. They're in love with love itself because they're very idealistic about love, but they're not really applying that to an individual. They're talking about it in the abstract sense as love as an idea. So, yeah, so you can totally make that point in essays if you like, and you agree with it. Always analyze along the lines of what you personally click with and agree with rather than just what I say or what someone else says, because it'll make your analysis feel a lot stronger. So next then, a technique synecdoche. This means when you use a part to represent a whole. So in this case, we have the phrase the marriage of true minds, and mind represents the whole. So minds connecting represents a union of souls, a connection of beings. So he's saying minds, meaning that he thinks that two people's brains connecting is really important. That's the most important thing. But he's using that in a shorthand to refer to the connection of two entire bodies through the idea of marriage and union. So that idea of being perfectly connected, like a soulmate, that type of thing. There's a lot of metaphors here, and I've just picked up on a few key metaphors. So there's many different metaphors to do with love. So he's using love as a starting point, and then he's going off into different metaphors about love, just so we can understand different aspects to the character or nature of that theme of love. He does this in Romeo and Juliet really well as well. So if you ever studied that one, Romeo has this speech where he goes on about what love is and what love isn't, and he's just going on forever. And it really reminds me of that speech, this poem. It's at the beginning when he's like not very happy with love, and it's sort of the opposite of this poem because he's going on about how much he hates love and how annoying it is. But yeah, Shakespeare really likes the idea of using multiple metaphors to describe the same concept, especially when it comes to love. So, firstly, it's an ever fixed mark. So, it's a fixed point in the distance that doesn't move. Maybe a mark suggests it's like a target that you're aiming towards. It's the star to every wandering bark. So, a star means it's this one here. It's a metaphor about navigation at sea. So, in the past, before we had what do we use? Google Maps or that kind of thing. What we used to use, if you were a sailor, is you just have like a little kind of compass, like a navigation device. And they're really cool, actually. I'm really interested in how they work. I have no idea. I think I would just be lost at sea and drown or die. But somehow they had this tiny little instrument and they could measure all of the stars and the distance between the stars. And because the night sky never changes, unless you're moving, the tiny changes in the sky would reflect what direction they're going in the world. So that helps them find their way across the ocean. So Shakespeare's saying it's like that star that sailors use to navigate, this thing that stays still in the sky while you move and you can measure it to sort of see your own progress. It's a complex metaphor, quite a beautiful metaphor, I think. And it also reinforces what I was saying about love being this kind of heavenly thing that's up in the heavens. Like it's a very powerful. You can't measure the value of it. It doesn't have a monetary value, but it has height. It's a great thing that's very tall and belongs to heaven. So you also said that love is not inferior to time. So love is not time's fool. Usually, a fool is someone who works for the king, and it's just there. That the job of a fool is to just entertain the king and the court. So love is not just there to please time, to entertain time. Love is its own powerful thing that is at least as strong as time, if not more so. There's a listing, I guess, of negatives or like a kind of compounding of negatives at the end, like he's getting more and more argumentative at this point. I never writ nor no man ever loved. You can see he's just repeating negative phrasing there. So he's willing to bet, or the poet or Shakespeare, depending on whether you think he is Shakespeare or just a speaker, he's willing to bet his whole career on his faith in true love. If he's wrong, then love isn't real anyway, and he's not a writer. So kind of suggesting that the whole point of life is love, to find true love, and the whole point of literature is to explore love. And he's extremely confident on it. And like I say, you can be cynical and criticize this. You don't have to think it's all mushy and silly. You're welcome to criticize. So it's a very bold statement to end on. It's like, I'll bet my life on it, my career on it, that kind of thing. There's some visual imagery as well, so that helps us envisage or picture these abstract ideas that he's dealing with. So again, the start at every wandering bark, really strong image of a sea, a ship. The sea is like kind of chaos and dark, and you don't really know where you are or where it's going. The ship is like the human or the individual who's just stuck in this kind of world of chaos, and love is this bright piece of light that we follow. So again, I think that's a beautiful image. When he's talking about rosy lips and cheeks being subject to the sickle of time, what he means is over time, your beauty or your youth will fade. So things that indicate physical kind of attractiveness will fade. So he's talking about mental and spiritual attractiveness, not just like you're going to meet this girl and she's beautiful and you love her forever, or this man and he's handsome and you love him forever. It's not to do with the aesthetics, the outward appearance. It's to do with the inner character and the soul and the mind. So it helps us understand the qualities of these personifications of love and time. Finally, we have hyperbole, which I love as a word. Not hyperbole, hyperbole. He's talking about the edge of doom. It bears it out even to the edge of doom. So love exists even in the worst possible thing. Doom is like the destruction of everything, the end of days. And he says love even lasts in that extreme situation. So again, showing the strength of this idea of love. And if you think about it, love is a hard thing to talk about. Like if I said to you, what is love? It's very, it's, I don't even know where to start with that. Like, what is it? You can't see it, or, it's not physical in any way. It means something quite different to different people. So it's quite, difficult to get your handle on. So he's trying very hard to define it via all of these language features. So if you're going into the message of the poem, which you should be if you're writing an essay, you can say that the message is that love is this very strong, perfect thing that we aim towards, that never changes, is this powerful, idealistic entity that we have to believe in, that kind of drives us forwards through life and is perhaps the purpose of life. So a couple of structural points now. It's a sonnet. You might have come across this word before. Sonnet is a 14-line poem. They're pretty much always 14 lines. Sometimes people mess around and do like 13 or 15. They always explore an idea, so they're not a story by themselves. Together they can tell a story, and I was saying that Shakespeare's sonnet sequence combined, it does actually tell a story if you read all of them through, and they have different recurring figures. But by themselves, they just exist as a kind of single idea. Sonnets are all usually traditionally on the theme of love. So nowadays, people don't actually just write sonnets about love, but when they first started as a popular form, which is just before Shakespeare's time, like maybe 100 years before, they were always based around love. And they come from the Italian sonetto, which means little song. So Shakespeare actually invented his own version of the sonnet that has a different rhyme structure to the Petrarchan sonnet, the normal Italian sonnet that was the first type of sonnet that became popular. Partly this is because he felt like the Italian rhyme scheme was different from English language rhyme and all that kind of thing, partly because he was a very famous sonneteer, you can call him. It's quite a good word, sonneteer. I'd like to be a sonneteer, but I've only ever written like two sonnets in my life, I think. One was actually about the Grim Reaper and death. Sorry, it's a bit dark, isn't it? But yeah, I was just, because we're talking about Grim Reaper and time and death and stuff. Um, Yeah, one of my sonnets was on that now, come to think of it. But I'm not a sonneteer. Shakespeare is a sonneteer. He invented his own particular form. So this is a Shakespearean sonnet. And it's structured like this. When I first looked at this, I remember doing it at uni and I was like, what on earth? I'm not going to remember all these different letters. But actually, it's not that complex. It's just three quatrains, so three four-line stanzas or groups of four lines. So A, B, three times basically, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then it's a couplet at the end. So it's that times three, and then a couplet at the end. So there's a final sense of harmony or resolution with that couplet. It's important to analyze that if it's relevant to your question. So everything else in the poem is alternate rhyme, meaning it goes back and forth. And it suggests that it's kind of rocking or it's deliberating, like it's thinking about different angles on an idea, and it's moving kind of forwards through that rocking rhythm. And finally, when you have the couplet, that goes away and it harmonizes. So punctuation then, always analyze punctuation for your structure and form points. Here we have a caesura or a use of caesura. There's lots of caesura here. So this is whenever he uses a semicolon or a full stop. So it creates quite a big pause in the flow of the poem, and it makes you think either about what he's just said or what he's about to say. So it can be dramatically referring forwards to what's about to come if it's like an important message, or it can be allowing you to kind of think a bit more about a message that he's just given you, depending on where that appears. So finally then, we're just going to have a look at a little bit of context. He was a Renaissance poet. I've kind of mentioned this already. So he was writing in the 1500s into the 1600s. This is Renaissance. It's called rebirth. It's a time where there's like a huge surge in literature and science and arts and technology and all sorts of stuff. Similar, it feels similar to now, to be honest. He only ever wrote sonnets, which is quite interesting. So like, even though he wrote loads of different types of plays, he only ever wrote one type of poem. And some people sort of suggest he kind of did it to make money because he did initially make more money off his sonnets than he did off his plays, and that his plays were something that he really loved. But the sonnets he wrote to kind of to be rich or whatever. All his sonnets were super popular in his day, and he was quite famous from writing them. And all his sonnets are kind of about love and relationships. Like I was saying, they follow a kind of thread and they have recurring figures. So you can kind of read them like a story if you read them all together. But by themselves, they all kind of stand out as well, which is very clever, I think, and quite difficult to do. In terms of his personal life, and be careful when you analyze Shakespeare's personal life because he's so slippery with what he writes. It's very difficult to see where he's putting himself into the work or where he's just playing around with characters and ideas. And also it's difficult to know exactly what happened because it's so long ago and there's not like that many sources for him. So a lot of people think he had a bit of an unhappy marriage. He was forced into marriage young. He married a woman who was a lot older than him. He had a reputation for being kind of a bit of a unruly teenager, and his dad wanted to calm him down, so he married him off. That kind of thing obviously didn't work because he ran away to London and tried to be an actor and then became a playwright. So it's a lesson to parents if you've got an unruly child, don't try and contain them because you'll just, they could be the next Shakespeare. You never know. So anyway, what am I on about? He had this like split between living and working in London and living back with his family, and he kind of skipped back and forth. But he didn't spend all his time with his wife and his kids, which makes you think maybe he didn't have this perfect love that he's talking about in this poem. So if you're of the cynical type and you don't fully believe in this like perfect true love idea, which I think probably most people are, um, except me for some reason. And yeah, if you're kind of more cynical, you can use this as a context point to back up your argument that you're making that it's overconfidence, it's posturing, it's not true, it's trying to defend itself too strongly. So finally, I'm going to just kind of end with where I started. It's always remained one of Shakespeare's most famous sonnets. It's often spoken at wedding ceremonies. I think if I ever got married, which I probably won't, if I did, I would probably have this poem, I think, at my own wedding because I just love it so much and it's just really powerful. And it's kind of like a warning, isn't it, to your husband? You're like, this is my idea of love. It's like all in. You best not be messing around, kind of thing. So, it's got that double positive kind of aspect to it, I suppose. But I want you to think about like why is it so popular? What is it about it that makes it stand the test of time? It makes people obsessed with it. It makes people have it on their most important day of their lives. They read this poem. Like, why would you have it at your wedding? Why? Think about it like that. And that will help you kind of open up interpretations and help you connect deeper to the themes. So, hopefully, you've enjoyed this lesson. As a final thing, I want you to think about these themes that I've written out here. These are the themes that are present in the poem, as well as thinking about how are they present in the poem. Think about Shakespeare's message on all of these. So, what is the final message on love? What is the final message on time or death or relationships and so on? So, what messages is he projecting to his society through his art? And that's always where you go deep into your essays. That always needs to be present in your essays as kind of an undercurrent to your analysis. So, hopefully, you've enjoyed this lesson and you like this poem as much as I do. And whether you believe that it's really true and idealistic or you're more realistic, hopefully, you can get something out of it and you feel confident analysing it in your exams now. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon, I'm sure, with my other poetry sessions. Bye for now.